We have 2014 ACTFL National Language Teacher of the Year, Linda Egnatz.
Hi. Really impressed with the numbers of you who are here at this time, because I'm really excited to share a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's all about students. And it's about envisioning the win. And the win for us as foreign language and world language educators is students who are users of the language that we teach. That's our win. And so I want to share with you a little bit about how I've kind of come to the conclusion that I should have learned how to become a coach rather than a teacher. Because it's really coaching that allows our students to grow and develop and to use that skill in a way that they can actually win on the playing field. And so that's what I'd like to share with you about. Because I have a real confession to make. I have coach envy. I envy coaches. My students, they'll come in and they'll say, I can't come in and make up that test because I have practice. I'm like, okay. Or they'll say, Coach said. Coach said, and it doesn't matter what Coach said, they want to do it. Coach said, I have to run an extra mile today. Coach said, I have to be there early tomorrow to lift weights. Coach said, I have to gain pounds. Coach said, I have to lose weight. Coach said, it's like God said. They will do whatever it is that Coach said. I say, would you do 5 minutes of homework practice? And I don't think they take it in the same tone as if Coach said, do 5 more laps around the football field. And so I have coach envy, and you can tell I've not been the most athletic person in my life, and still am not, but I want to know what it is that coaches do that will improve the connection that I have with students. How can I get students to work as hard as a coach can get his players to work on the field, even though it's hard, even though they're not very good at it, even though they lose a game? When my students fail a test, they want to go see their counselor. You know, coach says, we'll do better next time, and they're like, yeah, I want that. I have coach envy. So I'd like to introduce you to some of the players that I am learning to coach. This one is our hero currently in our school year, and he is the starting quarterback, and his name is Jake. And Jake is doing so well that he's being recruited by a number of, a number of universities. But he's the kind of the product of a language program, or of a sports program that began very slowly. Because 8 years ago, my school opened for the very first time. Brand new building, and when it only opened with freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. And actually, one of those juniors, also a quarterback, was Jake's older brother, also one of my students. And so, this idea of becoming the star quarterback was really important. But that first year for Jake's older brother, it didn't go so well. In fact, the first year, this was our record. 0 wins, 9 losses. But it didn't matter because Coach said we would be better next year. And our mascot is the phoenix. And I don't know if any of you know the sort of legend of the phoenix, but the phoenix is the firebird that dies. It rises from the ashes, and it comes back to life. And that's exactly what they did, because the next year, those juniors were a little bit bigger players and a little bit stronger and a little bit faster. And in the next year, we really began to set a football record. In fact, they went from 0 wins and 9 losses that following year to 8 wins and only 1 loss. Well, this year, until just about 2 weeks ago, we were at 11 wins and 0 losses. And that's not Jake's older brother. That was Jake. And Jake's really doing everything he can to become that player his brother was, to get those same scholarships, to work hard, to be there for practice. You know why? Because Coach said. And so I want to share that analogy because if we take what happens on the playing field, which they love to do. They sign up, they audition for, they beg to work really hard and to do all of those things to become good players. Well, quarterbacks, they don't start playing football their freshman year. As a matter of fact, Jake started when he was about 2. And he's had a football in his hand ever since. And you can see him, here he is, you know, little grade school boy running with that football. Because if you're going to make passes that create touchdowns and points for your team, you need a lot of practice. And that's exactly what we've been missing in the world language field. Because anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly at first. We have to give our students permission to do it poorly at first so that they're going to stick around for the long haul, so that then at some point they're going to be not necessarily a star football player, but they're going to be a proficient language user in the world that they're going to enter as adults. That they're going to have meaningful communication with native speakers of the language they learned in my classroom. And I want to tell you that I'm really proud of Jake, because not only is he an incredible football player, but in the state of Illinois, where we've adopted the state seal of biliteracy, Jake is one of this year's recipients. Proficiency takes time. You'll see this chart, this is in the ACTFL performance descriptors, that if I have students only in that first row as a freshman and a sophomore, or those first 2 traditional years of a high school language sequence, they will only get to that maybe novice high level. That they're not going to develop enough proficiency to actually use language, to be that language user, to have that winning strategy, unless they stick around for the long haul. And I give them the opportunity to start at a much younger age, at a much earlier point in their language learning career. I like this quote. It comes from Vince Lombardi, who was a legendary coach of the Green Bay Packers. In fact, the Super Bowl trophy is named after this coach. And he said one time, after losing a very momentous game, he said, "We didn't lose the game, we just ran out of time." And I want to propose to you that that's exactly what's happening in the world language field. We are not losing the game. We are doing the work in our classrooms, and we are creating language users, but we are running out of time because we're starting too late. And so I want you to look a little bit at the data. Well, what is this problem about that we have? And so if you look at that first 73%, and below that it says second language, that's because in Europe, our students, their counterparts, our counterparts, 73% of Europeans identify themselves as fairly proficient users of a second language. In the United States, according to the data that we get from the Department of Education, only 25% of Americans identify themselves as fairly proficient in a second language. Well, that seems kind of like a good number. It's about a third. And you know, we don't have all those little countries. We have states. That's okay until you begin to look and examine that data. And we find out that in that data, only 7% of 25% identify their language learning as something that happened in a classroom. The others identified their language experience as something that began at home. And so as language teachers, we're not effectively creating language users. Again, we could look at the data. And what is the difference? What's making the difference in Europe? Well, in Europe, 90% of children begin their second language learning experience at the elementary level. In the United States, the data we have says that only 15% of elementary children have an option to learn a language, and a lot of those programs are not proficiency-based. Well, then there's that third number. Well, that says that 42% of Europeans speak a third language or a fourth. We don't even have that data in the United States. And so according to the data, we are not meeting the needs of our students. We are not creating students who can go out in that workplace world and compete on the global stage. I'd like to meet Mohammed Abdelkader. We heard from him this last year as language educators from all over the country gathered in Washington, D.C. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Education at the White House. And these are some things that he said about language education that I think are really meaningful. He said first that language learning is a civil rights narrative. A civil rights narrative. That our students, that they're not having access to the same rights that other students have, not just in Europe, but in Latin America, in China, in Africa. And that's unfortunate. That is giving our students a disadvantage from the beginning. He said that that's really a problem in the United States because now 1 in 5 jobs is linked to international economy, whether it be through internet or marketing or manufacture. Finally, he said, language learning is no longer a nice to have, it is an essential. And that's something that I want my students to have, the essential skills required to be competitive, the essential skills, more importantly, required to communicate with people, to understand another person's perspective, to broaden their humanity. If you are a member of ACTFL, I'll put a plug, you should become one if you're not, because The Language Educator is one of the best magazines I get. And last month's issue had this poster I was able to now put into my classroom. And it's about oral proficiency in the workplace. And if you look at that circle where there's that void, that's the novice low to the intermediate low category. And that circle means that they have no jobs available to them. In other words, they're not proficient enough users of the language to be able to use the language in the workplace situation. I have to get my students to that novice or that intermediate mid or above level for them to actually have some workplace usage for the language they're learning. That means I need to extend their program. And so we need to begin as language professionals to talk to our students and suggest to them and their parents and the counselors and our administrators and our community members, our school board members and other stakeholders that language is not a college requirement, it is an enviable life skill. That if our students walk in with a language, a second language, a third language on a resume, that they will be distinguished, that they will be the one that receives that job offer. Language isn't a credit for graduation. It's not something to check off. Instead, it's going to check our students into future opportunity. So I'd like to expand the vision of what can be in our world language field. And that is, if we can take that vision of what might be happening in a small sequence of language learning and expand it from kindergarten all the way through the university level, we could see some incredible things begin to happen. If at the elementary level, in those dual language and immersion programs, our students have exposure to incredible content and vocabulary in the social studies and in the sciences, in the arts, those are language words that are actually applicable in the job market. If they're a doctor or a nurse, or they're working in some other kind of sociology or field. And then if they come to the high school level with that vocabulary, we can now talk about world problems and cognitively engaging and interesting issues and debates. We can talk about how can we solve problems. As an AP Spanish teacher, if I want to talk about the AP thematic issue of world challenges, and I want to talk about the environment, I still have to teach my children, my students, how to say tree and forest and mountain and lake and water. But if my students came to me with that vocabulary, imagine what I could do. And then if they took that vocabulary together with the cognitive activities and the engaging things and the authentic materials we were able to read and the perspectives that come to us from other places in the world into a college career path, imagine the opportunity we would be creating for them. One of the winning strategies that we're beginning to see sweep the country is the state seal of biliteracy. For those of you that are not familiar with that, the State Seal of Biliteracy is a recognition program provided by a state, or in some places a district, that will recognize a high school senior for having a highly proficient level of either of English and a second language. That second language may be something that's learned in the classroom, but it may also have been learned at home or through extended study or living abroad. And you'll see in blue the numbers of states that have already adopted the Seal of Biliteracy. The states that are in green and in yellow are in some part of that process. And this piece is not only a recognition tool, it's also a retention tool. Because remember, we need to keep our students involved in language long enough to be able to actually get good at what they're doing, to become a proficient user of the language. And so in my particular district, where we just finished our second year with the Seal of Biliteracy, our upper level numbers, our retention for our third and fourth year programs are up 30%. We're keeping students longer. So it's time to see our students not as test takers, but as language users. And more importantly, it's time to see ourselves as opportunity providers. And so how can I be more of a coach? What is it that I need to do? Well, I'd like to introduce you to Jalen Branch, or Nacho as he uses in class. And Jalen is an incredible scorer for our football team. That might be why he has jersey number 1. I don't know. But working with Jalen, I've seen him do amazing things for Coach. And I'm trying to get the same sort of amazing skills out of him as a language user. And so I'm trying to learn a little bit about sports vocabulary, because if I can use sports vocabulary with this young man, it works. And so I read about sports. I'm starting to read. What do coaches read? And I found out that they have, just like we have our 5 C's, they have 5 S's. And the 5 S's of sports training are stamina, speed, strength, skill, and spirit. Well, those are pretty important in the language classroom. Stamina, they have to be able to continue working hard when it's difficult. They have to be willing to make mistakes and to get their message across. Speed, well, there's that concept of fluency and sort of getting better at it and thinking on their feet and that interpersonal task that you assign to them. Strength, the strength comes from the broad vocabulary that they need to be able to communicate their ideas. Skill, those are those language functions that we're trying to spiral. Question asking and answering. Descriptive narrative. But most importantly, what we instill as a language educator is spirit. The reason why we do all of that hard work, it's not a win that goes on a scoreboard. It's a relationship with another human being. It's an understanding that's deeper and broader of the perspectives that others in the world might have. And so I started thinking about that and how can I embody that? And I think I'm going to share with you the story of a young lady who I believe embodies all of those. And her name is Rosa. And if Rosa has anything, it's heart for sports. She's a lover of sports. She grew up in Perla in Guatemala, a very small town in Guatemala. And you can see from the image, it's just a very rural area, and her family picked cotton. Well, when Rosa was 10 years old, she was on her way to the market to buy eggs. She was attacked. She was raped, 10 years old. And she lost both of her arms to a machete in the course of this attack, was left for dead. But Rosa's a survivor with a lot of heart. And she came to our family as a foster child and a Shriners Hospital patient where she was given prosthetics. She was with us for about 6 months when she learned how to use those prosthetics. After that period of time, Rosa decided those prosthetics were cumbersome. Well, she returned back to Guatemala, and her mother saw those prosthetic arms and said, "You can't pick cotton. You can't work." And she abandoned her. So Rosa came to us as our child. We adopted her into our family, and watched her heart and her love of sports continue to grow. And so you can see her here running the long distance relay, balancing the baton between her stubs, because if she'd put it under her arm, she'd be unable to run and have momentum. Rosa played soccer, never got called for handballing. She even played soccer for a while on the boys' team. When she was a senior, she found out that you could, if you had 7 letters in seven sports over the course of your sort of varsity career, you would earn this stadium blanket with the school's letter on it. She wanted that blanket. She had done 3 seasons of track, 3 seasons of soccer, and she was missing one sport. So she started talking to all the coaches, and she found the swimming coach allowed her to be the coach manager, the team manager, so that she could get that blanket. Rosa has a lot of heart. She has a lot of stamina. She doesn't really have necessarily a whole lot of speed, but she has an incredible spirit. And that spirit she's now using in Indianapolis Public Schools, where she is a mentor and a bilingual aid to students who, like her, have come to the United States as an immigrant and have had to learn English. So what has kept us in the language field from winning? What has kept our students from becoming that real-world language user? What has sent them down to the counselor's office to drop our course or not to sign up for the next year? Well, I think it has to do with this goalpost. You see, in football, as long as you kick the ball for the field goal through the goalposts, even if they bounce off of one in a sloppy kind of way, you score. Somehow, in our language field, we have decided that the ball has to go exactly, perfectly through the middle with no error. And as long as we create a situation where there is no room for error, we will not see students grow their language proficiency. So I had to think about what would motivate my students. And it became the idea of our own 5 C's: comparisons, communication, connections, communities, and cultures. And I started thinking about our 5 C's as 5 different gears. And so if we think about one gear, if I can spin one gear, then the rest will begin to spin. And so I want to introduce you to 5 students. And I'd like to invite you to imagine 5 of your own students that would be invited to increase their language use and their desire to become a language user because of the gear that they're spinning. This is Jessica. Jessica loved culture. She loved culture so much that she came with me on one of my trips. This particular one is Spain. She loved culture so much she went studied abroad in Spain. She loves culture so much that she became a Spanish teacher by the name of Senorita Beringer in a dual language immersion program in our capital, Springfield, Illinois. It was all about culture for her, and if she could learn more culture, she was in it for the long run. This is Maddie. For Maddie, it was about communication, because Maddie has Asperger's, and she didn't want to talk to anyone. She didn't want to be in a group. She didn't want to be in a pair. She didn't think anybody could be good enough and get it right. But in my class, Maddie found her voice. More importantly, she found her voice when we traveled abroad, and she found that she could help other students figure out what was the right thing to say. She was afraid to say it for herself, but she was certainly willing to help someone else how to ask for a ticket or buy something in a store. And pretty soon she realized that she could use language. This is Sarah. For Sarah, that 5C was all about community. She had that big heart of wanting to help the world. And today she's working in Honduras with children that are living on the street, addicted to shoe glue that they find in the trash cans from the shoe factories. And Sarah's created a sort of pen pal program with my own students, because for her, the 5C of community, if I can help the world, if I can engage with others, I want to know Spanish. This is Joey Romero, or as in class he was Romeo Romero. And for him, it was all about science. And he is a geeky boy. but he is now he had a double major in biology and science, and he's now working in marine research in Ecuador, because it was all about connecting with something he cared about. And your students are like that. Don't be offended if your subject isn't their favorite. Find out what it is and use it for all it's worth. Finally, I'd like you to meet Omar. And Omar, for him, it was about comparisons because he spoke Urdu. He came from India as an immigrant, as a 10-year-old child. He learned English, then he learned Spanish, scored 5 on the AP language exam, 5 on the AP literature exam. But for him, it was always about making comparisons between his native Urdu and Spanish and English and the native cultures. And so whatever it is that makes your student engage in the language, use that to begin to spin the other gears of our 5 C's. And if that's not happening in your class, maybe it's time to switch gears. Interest is a psychological state of engagement. It acts as what we call an approach urge that allows us to resist the things that make us afraid or scared of doing something. Interest pulls us forward. It allows us to do the hard work, just like the coach can get the interest in the win that allows those students to keep going. So I'd like to close with this thought. Seize the day. It's game time. Thank you.